Welcome back. December 17th is the International Day to End Violence Against Sex Workers. This day is part of many organizational efforts to protect, destigmatize, and decriminalize sex workers. Joining me to discuss sex worker rights and safety is the Director of Communications for the Sex Workers Project of the Urban Justice Center, Zola Bruce. Zola, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Now, can you tell me a little bit more about your organization, the Sex Workers Project of the Urban Justice Center?
Yes, since the early 2000s, we've been the only national organization that defends the human rights of sex workers by destigmatizing and decriminalizing people in the sex trades. So we do this through free legal services, policy advocacy, education, and we also just work to create a liberated world where all workers have the autonomy and power to fully enjoy their human rights.
Now, the world will soon acknowledge International Day to End Violence Against Sex Workers. Can you just let everybody know how this day actually began?
Yeah, so it actually began in 2003 and it was inaugurated by a sex worker, artist, and educator, Dr. Annie Sprinkle. And basically, the Sex Workers Outreach Project, also called SWAP USA, which is a separate organization than we are, but we work with as a community partner. And so this day actually just calls attention to the hate crimes committed against sex workers all over the globe. Specifically, it started to be recognized around the memorial vigil for about 49 found sex worker cases where the Green River Killer targeted, raped, and tortured women in Seattle, Washington. And so at that memorial, we decided that as sex workers, we need to continue to fight for sex worker rights internationally.
Now, I just noticed that you mentioned like it's a hate crime, and I'm really glad that you mentioned that because I don't think that when we have these conversations, people tend to use that language, and maybe it's sometimes viewed as just isolated incidents or certain things like that. Can you just talk a little bit more about why it's important to view it as a hate crime?
Yes, because actually, I mean, a lot of the issues that people have with sex work have to do with moral policing, and it's not based on anything that has to do with us being dangerous to society. And in fact, sex work is one of the oldest professions. So I do feel like the hate comes from, unfortunately, repression, a lot of sexual repression, a lot of sometimes religious oppression and suppression. And a lot of times, we judge others based on the fact that we are not maybe enjoying our own sex lives. So there's so many elements to that. I would also say that no one deserves to be violated at all. So if you don't feel like sexual violation is okay for yourself or anybody that you love in your family, then you should also not be okay with sex workers being targeted.
Now, how do allies honor those lost to violence on this day?
So, I mean, there's a lot of different demonstrations that happen and are normally led by different sex worker based organizations. But I do feel like one of the best ways to also help sex workers is to donate to these organizations and to keep us alive because we are the only ones that are activists. And also we're organizations that actually hire people who are in the sex trade. So we have our own personal knowledge. And I think that asking us questions is important, amplifying our voices is important, and recognizing that anybody might decide to do sex work consensually. It's a freelance job.
Now, what are some of the reasons why sex workers are more vulnerable to violence?
Well, specifically in this society, I would say in the States, it's known as a rape based culture. And I've learned more about that, what that really means when I lived in Europe, because when I lived in Amsterdam and Berlin, even though there's specifically in Amsterdam, it's more regulated sex work, people are all about consent and consent culture. In the US, it just feels like, again, like I said earlier, that people target sex workers as criminals when they actually are doing a job and creating a service that actually inspires people and their sex lives. So we are not dangerous people. However, we constantly have to worry about wage theft. We have to worry about people violating us because there's just no protections for us. So that means that we also don't have health benefits. Like people in Europe have universal health care. So, people are able to get treated whenever they need it. And here in the States, there are so many limits on our healthcare system in general that people think that we are the ones that are unsafe and maybe passing around disease. We're the least population that would do that because this is our job. We need to always be safe, and what's preventing our safety is criminalization.
Now, it's really unfortunate to say that sex workers are very limited when it comes to reporting violence. Can you talk about the challenges these workers face in that regard?
Again, because of criminalization, it's not like we can go to the police and report that we have been violated. And in fact, a lot of the people who have violated us are police officers, specifically NYPD Vice. We've been trying to dismantle NYPD Vice and working against that in our policy advocacy department because what happens is when people are plainclothes officers and they're saying they're trying to catch human traffickers, they're actually also taking advantage of their power and raping and abusing sex workers who might have consensually decided to do sex work. So it's hard to deter between trafficking and consensual sex work when you cannot actually report that you've been violated. And
Yeah.
also, unfortunately, the system has not worked in our favor.
Yeah, I definitely want to expand on that. That, according to your organization's research, police officers can also participate in this violence, which I was very shocked, to hear about. Can you just tell us a little bit more on that finding?
Yeah, so basically, and I'm going to stay away from stats because that's something that we try to be really careful of. We're not here to sway audiences, but we are here to say that nobody deserves to be violated. And as we're all taking like these sexual harassment trainings, etc., I don't understand how people think it's okay to violate someone when they're doing sex work, including even regulated sex work. We know within the strip club industry, we know within the porn industry, these are regulated jobs, but still we're being violated. Why? Because I think it's a societal issue in general. It goes back to the rape-based culture. It goes back to the fact that because it's criminalized, police officers have the power to rape and also put people in prison who haven't done any harm to anyone. In fact, similar to going to get a massage, going to a spa. Sometimes people go to therapy once a week, similar to going to a sex worker once a week. It's a type of therapeutic care that some people desire. So I think looking at it differently is really important, but also specifically with the police department. Again, us not being able to protect ourselves in general, and a lot of us are BIPOC and identify as gender nonconforming and trans, and specifically people who are Black trans women that are put in prison are seen as dispensable and are seen as people who do not deserve to live and have died in the facilities, specifically when they're put in male prisons. So there's a lot of crime going on in the police department and behind the scenes that we are also trying to fight against.
Now, I definitely want to touch on a really important topic, which is, decriminalizing or legalizing. Can you just first explain what is the difference between legalizing and decriminalizing sex work?
Okay, so I actually understood it more too when I moved outside the States because we already criminalize sex and sexuality here. So when I go into a more open and free culture, like in Amsterdam and Berlin, experiencing consent-based culture, I realized, okay, there's some regulated sex work that is still a bit safer, but still not completely fair because in order for something to be regulated, that means your body is regulated. So you have to have paperwork, you have to be registered with the state. And again, with us trying to take on this in-demand model or the Nordic model, it criminalizes the customers, clients, or managers directly by harming us. We can't really actually gain our source of income if you criminalize our clients, for example. And even though it's kind of stated to confuse people and saying like, hey, at least we're not throwing sex workers into jails. At the same time, the whole point of doing any kind of job is to make money. So really it's using morals and morality policing to push us out of our jobs that we might choose to do. And again, when I say our jobs, I mean, just like any job, nobody loves their job every day. Some people work certain jobs because they just have to make ends meet. And in fact, a lot of sex workers are working multiple jobs. So it's maybe not only a sex work industry-based job. They're trying to actually make ends meet. So really looking at really economics and labor rights is really important. And that's something that we really try to focus on. We talk about full DPEM because everyone should have bodily autonomy. Everyone should be able to choose the job that they want to work. And everybody should experience pleasure if they would like to, whether with a sex worker or not. So I think that some of this judgment, this stigma, this sensationalism, and the dehumanization that's perpetuated against us as sex workers specifically really makes it harder for society in general to receive sex education, pleasure activism, and really talk about things that
So
are,
I'm sorry, I
really harming
definitely
our
want
culture.
to interject because, as we're talking about advocacy, I want to highlight the life of Carol Lee, a person who made, an effort to improve the life of sex workers, and, just to do that work. Can you talk about the lasting impact they had on this community?
Oh yeah, so Carol Lee is a sex worker, artist, and activist who coined the term sex work in the 1970s, and really talked about sex work as an industry prostitution. People are very ignorant about what sex work is. Sex work is a ever expanding field, and I think that it's been amazing that Carol Lee was able to educate larger audiences about sex worker rights via comedy and writing. Um, Carol Lee wrote a book called Unrepentant in 2004. And, it's unfortunate that Carol died of uterine cancer, but it's been also great that Carol already thought about leaving their legacy and started the Carol Lee Fund to fund sex worker rights-based organizations.
All right.
So yes, we really do commemorate people like Carol Lee. I'm a sex worker artist, and I'm kind of living on and passing the baton was kind of passed on to me and many other sex worker artists who are empowered and are able to be out and open, and that's why I aim to always amplify the voices of sex workers.
All right, Zola, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
If you would like to know more or keep up with the Sex Workers Project, please be sure to go on their website at swp.urbanjustice.org or follow them on Instagram at Sex Workers Project. We've come to the end of our show. I'd like to thank all of our guests for joining us and you, the viewers, for tuning in. If you missed any part of today's show, you can catch the recable cast at 5 and 10 p.m. on Optimum Channel 67 and Verizon Fios Channel 33, or watch anytime on the web at bronxnet.org. I'm Kibin Alleyne, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.